Many of you, like me, are just emerging from Christmas break hibernation, so pardon if it seems like the words don't come very easily today. So my name is Kyle Kimball. I am Vice President of Global Government Relations for also on the board of the New York City Tourism Committee, which is a fundamental part of Broadway. And in case you're new to us, the Center for Urban Future is a think tank focused on New York City's future. And our research consistently elevates important issues onto the radar of government officials, regularly sparks policy changes and investments that create a stronger and more equitable economy in New York City. Much of our work at CUF focuses on how to expand access to good jobs and enable a lot more New Yorkers to climb into the middle class and accelerate economic and social mobility. And making economic progress, making that economic progress will be a lot more difficult in the arts and Broadway if we're not clicking on all cylinders. And CUF has done many reports, and I direct you to the website if you haven't already been there, over the years showing that the arts, the creative industries, and Broadway have become increasingly vital engines of job growth in New York City and a key anchor to the tourism sector and, in my case, to the higher ed sector through our School of the Arts. It's one of the main reasons, Broadway is one of the main reasons that folks come to the Tisch School of Arts and the other arts-related opportunities at a university like NYU. But as we'll hear today, there's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that the city's theaters make a full recovery from the pandemic. And I'm really excited for today's discussion, and I can't wait to hear everyone's ideas for how to accelerate the return to Broadway and the ecosystem around the visitors who are attending. We would not be here today without the generous support of the Schubert organization, and big thank you to them for sponsoring this forum and hosting us today. And this is actually one of the more fun venues we've had for a CUF policy forum. If somebody could take a picture, I'll send it to my mom and I'll tell her I finally made it to Broadway. And please now, I also want to thank our panelists for doing this. And we really appreciate you taking the time this morning to help think through some of these ideas. And now please join me in welcoming the awesome Executive Director, Jonathan Bowles.
And everybody at Schubert for making this possible. As Kyle said, this is pretty spectacular. We do a lot of policy forums at the Center for Urban Future. I think I see a bunch of faces, people who've been to our events. This is definitely by far the coolest place that we have had a forum. So we're so glad to be part of this and to be partnering with you, Charlie. So as Kyle mentioned, New York really needs Broadway clicking on all cylinders. We all know how important Broadway and the broader arts community is to this city. It's only gotten more important over the last couple of decades. We've documented that through our reports on the creative industries, on the arts. You could check out Creative New York, a report that we do every 10 years and that we're working on for a new report this year in 2025, documenting the economic power of the arts. But Broadway is so important. The good news is that it is recovering. And I don't want to kind of get through this conversation without saying there is progress being made. Broadway has come a long way from the depths of the pandemic. Tourists are back to New York City in big numbers. New Yorkers are doing their part on Broadway. My colleague Stephanie, by herself, I think, has been helping the theater community get back into business. She's been to about 6 plays in the last month or two, so a big thank you to Stephanie. But as Kyle mentioned, one crucial part of the theater district's recovery is still lagging behind, and that is visits from people living in New Jersey, Westchester, and other parts of the surrounding region. Through September, Broadway ticket sales to individuals living in these surrounding communities were still down 15 to 20% from 2019 levels. The problem, as we understand it, is especially pronounced in this area. In fact, folks in other Manhattan districts that we've talked to have told us that they haven't noticed the same lag in regional visitors that this area in Times Square has. So what's going on here, and what can the city do to accelerate the return of regional visitors and bolster the overall experience of New York's vital theater district? Those are the questions that we're going to delve into today. First, with a really terrific group of panelists, and second, with a fireside chat with Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. So I can't wait to hear the ideas that come out of this. And without further ado, let's bring up the panelists and my amazing editorial and policy director at the Center for an Urban Future, Eli Dvorkin.
Good morning, everyone. Is that enough energy, you guys think? Good morning, everybody. Oh, that's a little better. We didn't do all of our vocal warm-ups already, so I don't know if anybody has a routine they need, but it's such a pleasure to be here on New World Stage, and thanks again to Charlie and team at Schubert for having us, hosting us. My name is Eli Dvorkin. I'm the editorial and policy director at Center for an Urban Future. I will briefly mention who we're joined with on the stage, but in your programs, you will have a QR code if you want to see everybody's bios in detail. So I will just briefly mention who we're here with today, and then we'll get right into the conversation. And I would also mention to our audience here and everybody streaming from home or their offices that we will save time for Q&A at the end of the first panel. So think through your questions. We'll take questions in the room. You can tweet any questions at NYC Future, or Blue Sky is up there on the screen as well. Let us know what you're thinking and ask questions, and I will share as many as we can get to at the end of the conversation. And then don't go anywhere, because we will segue directly into the fireside chat with District Attorney Bragg. So let me just briefly mention who we're up here with today. Starting on my far left, Councilmember Eric Bottcher represents this district. Next to him is Charles Flateman, the Executive Vice President of the Schubert Organization and Board Chair of New York City Tourism and Conventions. Damian Bazzadona, who's the founder and president of Situation Group and has done work studying the dynamics of the theater district. Jimmy Kim Diaz, City Executive for Arcadis, who is also the lead consultant on the Fifth Avenue redesign, which is very exciting to see in New York City in 2024. And last but not least, to my left is Tom Harris, the president of Times Square Alliance. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being with us today. So, let me start with a question maybe for Tom and for Charlie, two people who've probably spent as much, if not more time in this district than anyone. Let me ask you both a little bit about where we are today in the theater district and in Times Square. I mean, New York City's economy has bounced back in so many ways from the depths of the pandemic, seeing record numbers of private sector jobs. I think most New Yorkers feel the difference in their daily lives as they walk through the city. But at the same time, we know that there are some scars from the pandemic that still linger. There were maybe some pre-existing challenges that have only been magnified in the past few years. So why don't we start with Charlie and then maybe Tom. Tell me a little bit about where are we today in the theater district and in Times Square compared to, let's say, 2019? What are those economic indicators that tell us that there's still some work to be done?
Thanks, Eli, and welcome everybody to New World Stages. I think in order to really dig into this, the first layer we have to look at is tourism overall to New York City. So just for a little bit of table setting, prior to the pandemic, New York had a record number of tourists, 66.6 million visitors. That 666 always sticks in my head. And then the pandemic happened, so go figure. We have not fully recovered to that number yet, although we are very, very close. So we'll finish out tourism to New York City overall at about 64,364,500, something like that, for 2024. So we are mostly there, with some pockets of weakness, and I think it's wonderful to look at how far we have recovered, and I think everybody who looks at these metrics can see that we will get over the hump to catch up to what was our best year ever. In 2025 looks like what will be happening, but the mix of visitors to New York City has very much changed. And what that looks like to us who are watching these tourism metrics, our international visitation is up and has grown strongly. Domestic travel to New York City is now also up with these two places of concern. One is business travel. It has not recovered. So business travel meaning people who do conventions, meetings, and host them in New York City. That piece has not come back and probably won't come back in 2025. And then regional tourism, which is the topic of what we're here today, meaning suburbanites for the most part. So the challenge for us is going to be how to re-engage with this piece of what is a Broadway audience, Times Square visitors, and certainly impactful for New York City. And I'm sure we'll get into all of the layers and reasons of why that happened in a few minutes.
Thanks, Charlie. Tom, do you want to tell me a little bit more about where you are in Times Square compared to pre-pandemic?
Sure. So I'll answer the question, and then I'll go backwards. So we're probably about 15% off in total. But that only tells half the story. There are a lot of opportunities that have been created, and it's important for us to sort of find our new norm. No one ever wants to go backwards, and we have to remember 2019 was a peak year. So as Ellen from my team said, it's like comparing every peak to Mount Everest. If you do that, you're going to be disappointed. So there are a lot of opportunities that we've had. Today alone, 100 people are able to watch this panel virtually, where in 2019 that wouldn't have happened. So there are new opportunities that we have that have been created. It's important to sort of find our new norm. What I will say is that I'm encouraged by all of the numbers in Times Square. We're up 20% pedestrian count from last year or from 2023 to 2024. We are moving in the right direction, and we're going to find a way to bring those tri-staters back. That's down. Their visa spending is down 13% last year, which that's the one number that hasn't recovered. So there's an opportunity there. We just have to find a way to take advantage of it.
Thanks, Tom. Well, let me ask Damien, bring you in on this. You know, you've taken a look by surveying theater goers, trying to get a better sense, finger on the pulse of what's shaping their decisions. And I mean, just to underscore, I think, a point that Charlie was making before, and Tom, you brought this up. Look, 2019 was a peak year for tourist visitation in many foot traffic in many of our districts. And that was true of Broadway as well, right? Broadway's 2018 to 2019 season, I think the biggest, best, season ever in terms of revenue and attendance. But the 2023 to 2024 season was still about 17% below the 2019 season. That's a significant dip. And as Charlie was beginning to allude to, that affects jobs, that has a spillover effect across our whole economy. We're talking about a part of the city, Broadway, that generates over $1.5 billion in direct economic impact just through those ticket sales, and many times that 10 or 12 times that in terms of indirect impact. So when you see Broadway down 15 or 17%, that has a ripple effect across the city. What I'd love to ask you, Damien, is why you see that continuing decline. What is it that is driving that decision making? What did theater goers tell you, especially those from the region, was keeping them away?
Yeah, well, we surveyed, I think, 3,000 survey theater goers. And I think what was most telling to me was that there wasn't one specific thing. And I think people are looking for one specific answer to say, why is it down? And I look at it as like I've always, I think of it as a 20% problem. Everything is off by about 20% in different ways. The surveying was done over a year ago, and so much has changed. And I look at, like, Broadway, for example. We turned the switch off on every live experience in this city in 2020. We shut it off. Everyone created new habits, had new lives, moved, changed, and then we turned the switch back on. It takes time for things to kind of get back to where they were. The fact that we are as close to back to where we were is unbelievable to me. And it just shows the power and the strength of what people want in their storytelling. When we asked people about a year ago why they weren't coming in, it was work from home was one element. I'm just not in the city enough. Tickets are too expensive. Everything is too expensive, which is the answer on every survey question ever. Okay? We know this. It was changing habits, and the transit systems have come up. I take New Jersey Transit. I'm a suburbanite. It is an absolute terrible experience. No one would disagree with me. I'm sorry. And there's no end in sight. So there's a lot of different headwinds, yet that was only a very small percentage of people showing the power of the city. And yes, crime was part of that, but a very small part of it. And so as you look through all, it was like, I don't want to say death by a thousand cuts, but you get the idea. It came a lot of different elements that added up to that percentage. After that, after we run these monthly events, and we ran an event showing that research, I got a phone call from the New York Post, and they did an interview with me asking about what did I see in the research. And through that conversation, I specifically said to the reporter, I said, I know you guys want a salacious headline on this, but this isn't about crime. This is about a whole bunch of different things. Sure enough, the story comes out, and it's like suburbanites scared of New York City and this whole thing. And I'm sitting there going, and I've had calls with many people on this panel going,
me.
what the hell are you doing, Damien? What are you talking about? And I'm saying, and if you read the actual article, I encourage you to see it. You read the article says the facts. The headline leaves with salacious headlines. Later that night, Fox News picks it up on the Gutfeld show, and I see the headline. I almost vomited. I'm going like, oh my God. And I bring that up because this is a very polarizing topic. New York City is in many respects, how people want to kind of bash against it. And I hope we'll talk a little bit about it later, but it's a lot about communication wars. As we have a city, multiple things can be true, right? There are issues with New York City. I had one day where it took me literally 3 hours to get to work. I live in Chatham, New Jersey. It's about a 45-minute train ride. It took me 3 hours to come into work. That is unsustainable. That same day, someone in my office, my head of HR, was actually attacked on 37th and Broadway. Someone hit her with, a sick person really hit her with a stick. And I'm going to myself, and at the same time, there's no other place on this planet I would do business. And so there are these conflicting things that I think we just need to acknowledge that I think definitely sit in the suburbanites. And we need to figure out how to communicate effectively. Yes, there's work to be done, but there's so many amazing things that are happening. I think it's really proving out in the numbers. Our comeback, just really for Broadway as a whole, and New York City as a whole, it's incredible how far we've come back, given where we just were. So.
Well, thanks, Amy. Look, I want to push into some of the challenges that you just brought up, and maybe let's and certainly we want to talk about regional transportation and improvements that can be made there, and we want to talk about affordability and other things that might be keeping people away and changes in habits, so that it may be very hard to shift at this point. But it does seem like one area where change is not only possible but is desperately needed is around public safety. So let me ask a little bit about this. Maybe Tom, you can help speak this as well. Part of it is I just look at the data, and I understand that we've seen a significant decrease in the 7 major crime categories over the past couple of years in the district. At the same time, the data shows that felony assaults were up over 10%. That larceny was up over 25% over the past 2 years. So it's not like we can safely say that each of these major categories are trending in the right direction in this district. There are some real challenges, at least the data suggests, that are out there, separate from the perception challenges, which I want to talk about those as well. And certainly it doesn't help when you see increases in the number of folks that are dealing with severe mental illness, with seemingly untreated, when you see the folks with substance use disorders in public really struggling without seemingly anywhere to go. So let me, Tom, let me ask you a little bit about this first of all. When you, and you're someone with a background in law enforcement, when you look at the situation in the district right now, what do you see as the legitimate public safety challenges as opposed to the kind of perception challenges that need to be addressed? And where do you think we need to go in terms of actually confronting those challenges more effectively?
Okay, that's a great question. What I want to just start off by saying, forget crime numbers. Perception is reality. If people don't feel safe, they are not going to come back, and we need to deal with that. So anyone who tries to say, oh, crime is down, it's just a perception, I would say that they need a lesson in communication, because people's perceptions are what causes them to make decisions in the morning, and those decisions are, I am not going to come back to Manhattan, because all you hear is about bad things that happen in Manhattan. So the reality of it is, especially in Times Square, and I say this, and it doesn't really matter, but the index crimes are down over 20% in Times Square, and no one seems to care. I care. But when I look at the opportunities there, we have 2 issues that I think that we need to deal with to make perception catch up to reality. Well, 3 actually. One is we need to do a better job of communicating and not telling people it's all in your mind, it's just perception. So I would say that should be the first thing that we do, and that would probably have more of an impact. The second thing, we have challenges with people suffering from mental illness on the streets who 10 years ago were in Rikers Island. Not the best solution for someone with mental illness, but that was our solution. Now we don't seem to have one. I am optimistic that from what I've heard from elected officials on both sides of the aisle, that change is coming for that now. So I know that Tony Simone is coming out with some sort of a paper today about dealing with the mental illness, homeless, and substance abuse challenges that we face. We've had good conversations at all levels about that. The second thing is repeat offenders. So we have to find a way to address those people whose job it is to commit crimes for whatever reason. You could look at the root cause of it. You could, whatever way you want to deal with that, that's okay, but you can't not deal with that. So those would be the two things that I think, the three things we could do. One is communicate better, two is deal with the people with mental illness, and three is come up with effective strategies for the repeat offenders. And I think that will have the perception match the reality.
Thanks, Tom. Councilmember, I want to bring you in on this as well. I mean, you spoke really eloquently just the other day about dealing with this intersection of mental health crises and criminal justice. What do you see as the necessary solutions going forward, at least as it comes to in terms of public safety in the district, whether those are things that the council can do on its own, things that you'd like to see the mayor lead on, things that you'd like to see the state take the lead on? What are some of the things that you want to see happen in 2025?
Well, first of all, thank you for convening this conversation. One of the things that the pandemic brought out into the open is the mental health crisis that is a truly shameful thing for our city, state, and country. Our country has failed so badly on the issue of mental health. And for a long time, it wasn't out in the open, because the truth is that we were jailing and imprisoning people with serious mental illness for long periods of time. We have, as a society, have shifted away from that, and that's a good thing. But what are we doing instead? Seems like people are languishing on the streets, on the subways, suffering from serious mental illness without the health care, the mental health care and services that they deserve as people who are suffering from sickness. We as a country have not taken mental health seriously in a way that we take physical health. If someone was walking around with a broken arm, we would ensure that they were given treatment. But someone could be walking around with severe mental illness, schizophrenia, and we let them die on the streets. That is not something that we, as the richest city in the richest country in the world, should allow to happen. The good news is that things are changing. We are beginning to make progress on mental illness, but it has been too slow. You've seen it at the state level with the allocation of billions of dollars for inpatient mental health beds. At the city level, the mayor with the previous health commissioner, Ashwin Vasan, came out with a plan to expand clubhouses, community centers like Fountain House, places for people with serious mental illness to go during the day. Because you could give someone an apartment with wraparound services. We forget that people need things to do all day. You can't expect people to sit in their apartment and watch Netflix all day. A lot of the people who are on the street struggling with mental illness have housing, something that we don't necessarily realize. But we've got to take this much more seriously than we do. During COVID, you saw the creation of thousands of hospital beds overnight, responding to an emergency. Let's cut the red tape and stop taking this slow approach to dealing with mental illness and stand up inpatient psychiatric beds, inpatient residential treatment for people with mental illness. Unfortunately, it takes federal funds to do this. Congressman Dan Goldman and Senator Gillibrand have legislation that would unlock billions of dollars of federal funds to do this. I'm not hopeful with this administration coming that we'll be able to do it, but let's try, because we as a country are so much better than this. The city council's part We passed legislation requiring the creation of respite centers, places for people to go when they're released from the emergency room. Because people are cycling in and out of emergency rooms, and where do they go when they're released from the emergency room? Right now, they're often going back into the streets and shelters. That's why you see people with hospital bracelets on our streets. We can do so much better and have to do so much better. As a city council member, I see it as my responsibility to ensure that the city is doing our part, and we've been trying to elevate this issue to the top, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to say that we were the generation of leadership that finally made change in this area.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'd like to stay on this topic, or come back to this topic rather. And Charlie, I certainly want to hear what your thoughts are in terms of, Damien sort of laid out a whole host of issues that he kind of described as 20% each, kind of contributing to the challenge. And Jamie, I want to bring you in as well. And if you want to chime in around the public safety issues, you're welcome to. I also have some questions that I think would really play to your long experience around public realm. But just before we get there, Charlie, I want to ask you, help us understand, is it really 20% kind of across the board? Can you help us triage and understand what really are the top issues that you see as keeping us from, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, getting back to Broadway firing on all cylinders? How does public safety fit in? How do the other challenges that you see stack up in comparison?
Thanks. I think it was Tom who said the statistics sort of belie what people's personal understandings are. So it's one thing to communicate crime is down and somebody can read it, but if it's not their direct experience, it doesn't feel like the journey to the theater, the journey to the theater district, the journey through Times Square, if it has a perception, particularly for this suburban market, of lack of safety. And those things, we've talked about these sort of small bits many, many times. The things that we see, certainly people with mental challenges on the street, it's not illegal for them to be there, and yet it creates a sense of discomfort. Certain other behaviors that we see throughout Times Square, we have chosen to have pedicabs. That's not a crime. We've made that happen, and yet it causes people to feel that that the city is somewhat out of control, because when they walk out of the theater, there's no place for them to go, and seniors in particular feel hemmed in and unsafe. We have chosen for many, many years to have vendors on our streets. I've been looking at this vendor situation literally for 30 years, and it has never gone away. Yet the compression of pedestrians now on the streets coming out of the theaters, visitors that are double the number of visitors that they were in 1998, for instance. There are twice as many. When we talk about 65 million visitors, that's twice as many tourists that came to New York in 1998. Twice as many. Well, those people are on the streets, and those people are on our sidewalks and in our public spaces. And when matinees are letting out or coming in, those people are compressed with bollards on the street for safety in other ways. And then we have chosen to take this very valuable public space, our curbsides and our sidewalks, and use them to sell T-shirts or chicken and rice or Louis Vuitton bags or whatever it is. How did that become the choice that we made? And
Marijuana.
And are those choices the right choices when we're dealing with so many people? And the reason I dwell on that is because the communication of that and the perception of that is felt intimately to people from the suburbs who have to cross over, have to jump these hurdles of New Jersey Transit, which is a challenge, who have to make that walk from 34th Street into lovely Penn Station first, north on 8th Avenue is a challenge. And then all of the hassles that surround that in order to have this life-changing, wonderful experience of that 2 hours in the theater. Those are the things that we need to look at, and that sort of perception, the public realm issues that I know we'll talk about in a minute, the perception is what creates that reality. And I think we need to remember that the theater district, where the theater district goes and the theater industry goes, so goes New York City tourism in both directions. As tourism goes, so does Broadway. And I think we need to show a little more love to the district and to the way that we care for our patrons, for the people who love this unique art form that is particularly New York City.
Well, thanks, Charlie. I think you really couldn't have created a better segue, teed up Jimmy any better. Let me just say, Jimmy, from your experience, thinking about transportation strategy, thinking about public realm improvements, where do you see the most room for improvement in the theater district today? And Charlie kind of mentioned some of those things. I mean, walking up from, you come out of the redeveloped Moynihan Hall, which feels like a much more welcoming experience, to say the least, and you go take a left turn and go up 8th Avenue, and it doesn't feel so welcoming anymore. There's a lot of competing uses for our streetscape, and that makes sense. It's only grown between city bike and micromobility options, planters and parklets, options for vending or not, and then pedestrians, coupled with challenges around traffic. There's a lot of competition. Then potentially in the near future, more demand for electric vehicle charging infrastructure and other things. A lot of different needs and potential overlapping or competing uses for that street space, that sidewalk space as well. And then you've got sort of other aspects of what it is that makes, I think, the public realm truly feel welcoming, whether that's green space or wider sidewalks or other things. So I'd love to get your thoughts about, first of all, where are the biggest opportunities for improvement in the district? And what do you think is working maybe in other parts of Manhattan that you think should be adapted or adopted over here?
So I want to take a step back. We've been talking a lot about COVID, even though it's been many years since we've all dealt with a pandemic. But COVID really revealed to New Yorkers how important our public spaces are. And it didn't take huge capital investments. What did we do? We cordoned off blocks, and we really put the responsibility on community members, the businesses and the residents, and other interested people who live and work in the area to program those spaces and to activate those spaces. So I make that point because I think oftentimes there's such a focus on the public realm itself, how it's designed. And part of the issue, and we're gonna, I can talk about, the Fifth Avenue project that I'm currently working on. It's the ownership of these spaces and having people, not just the visitors who come from abroad, but the folks who live in New York and who live in the region, to feel like these are also their spaces. These are not just tourist attractions. And so how do you do that? It's not easy, right? If it was, we would have found solutions years ago. I'm gonna talk about a project that I worked on 2006, Gansevoort Plaza. I'm sure many of you know it, have walked it. It's a very special place. It's truly spectacular. But back in 2006, I was working at an engineering firm, and it was a ragtag group of really smart, active community activists, Joe Hamilton from the community board, Florent Morellet, who used to own Florent, the restaurant, Josh David from the High Line, and this is before the High Line opened, and they said, we really need a solution for, this Gansevoort Plaza area. It's a mess. There's traffic and nightclub activity, and really what we did was the study started as a access, circulation, and safety, pedestrian and vehicular safety study. That has morphed through the years into what Gansevoort Plaza is now. And the great thing is they're not resting on the laurels. There's still activity, there's development activity, there's investments along the waterfront, and it's really sparked a district that's really exciting. And I say that because it's not a one-off solution. It's taken decades. I mean, I feel like I just worked on that study a few years ago. I can't believe it's been over 20 years. This is New York. Things are tough. Things happen in these kind of protracted battles. And then there are the moments where, you know, we talk about the space, but it's also the land uses and the programming and the, the new uses that are created and then transform a district, and the land use and the public space complement each other. And I think the other beauty of the Gansevoort Plaza area is that it attracts a real diverse group of visitors and users. And I think, again, we want to create spaces that are, you know, attractive to New Yorkers. I mean, when we started working on the Fifth Avenue redesign, which, by the way, is a really interesting and novel model that the city has taken on, which is to bring on a group of business improvement districts as co-partners, both in terms of decision-making, but in terms of bringing, you know, the resources to do the design and construction. So it's complicated. You have a lot of folks at the table. But one of the things that we talked about from the very beginning was making a place that was attractive to New Yorkers as well as out-of-towners, as well as global visitors. And we had surveys, lots of surveys. And we got those responses. Look, there's not, I mean, we're going to have the same challenges. Vending, I don't know how we solve that, right? I mean, the design itself is not going to address that issue. It's enforcement, it's other policy issues. So I guess I'll pause there. I can, and I think for Times Square, I don't have that one-off solution. I think I work at a global company, and in the past year, I've seen so much activity from places like Oxford Street in London or the Champs-Élysées in Paris, going through the same sort of challenges and reimagining their places. Because what we're seeing now is more of global competition to be regional or global attractions. Everybody's sort of stepping up, and everybody's having the same post-COVID challenges. I can't tell you how many business improvement district leaders I've introduced from London to New York, from Paris to New York. I mean, everyone's having these conversations. So that's a little bit of context.
Well, I think jumping off of that, Jimmy, I'd like to ask everybody, and yourself included, is there one thing that you've seen elsewhere in New York City or elsewhere in the world that you think is not only working, but could work here? And I'm open to anything. I'm thinking about public realm. Maybe it's about public art. Maybe it's about transportation. But something, a place or a thing that you've seen and you think, not only is this great and it's working in Paris or it's working in, you know, Indianapolis or it's working in Sao Paulo, but like we should bring it here.
I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to make a prediction. I believe that in a decade, you're going to see tremendous positive change on 8th Avenue, particularly between 34th Street and 42nd Street. One of the issues with 8th Avenue is that it's bookended currently by the Port Authority bus terminal and Penn Station, two of the most unpleasant and poorly designed pieces of transportation infrastructure in the world. The good news is that Penn Station, there's big changes happening at Penn Station. If you've been there recently, it has improved. They now have restaurants. My staff and I go to Penn Station not infrequently to have lunch. If you had told me a few years ago that I'd be going into Penn Station to eat, I never would have believed you, but they have tremendous offerings in that new train hall. We have a long way to go to achieve the grand train hall that we deserve at Penn Station, but it is in process. At Port Authority Bus Terminal, a lot of New Yorkers don't realize the Port Authority Bus Terminal is going to be replaced. And by 2032, we are going to have a brand new Port Authority Bus Terminal that is going to be modern, like the new LaGuardia Airport Terminal. I mean, it's going to be tremendous, and it's going to emanate far beyond the walls of that terminal and have tremendous positive impacts in the neighborhood. Right now, you've got these places that are holding the neighborhood back, pulling it down. It's going to lift it all up. And that kind of investment in the public realm and public infrastructure, it's going to do so much more than give commuters a better experience. It's going to lift up our entire neighborhood. Street level retail, atriums instead of low ceilings, entertainment. It's going to be a huge positive for our community.
I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about what you think is working. Jimmy, you also tell us
Just,
more about.
when you talked about looking 10 years out, let's not forget we've got the Gateway Hudson Tunnel program. That's another project I'm working on, and very proud of that because in the past year, so much was done to lay the groundwork to ensure, despite the administration change, that that project, which if I shouldn't assume everyone knows, but it is the long-awaited train tunnel between New York and New Jersey, which would fix a lot of the challenges we're seeing today with New Jersey Transit and Amtrak, and really creating that barrier to wanting to come into the city. With Gateway in the next 13, 14 years, it's going to create really world-class and redundant infrastructure, transit infrastructure, and allow and really complement all of the transportation improvements the councilman has mentioned. And I'm thinking about our airports, right? Like, think about what we did at LaGuardia. Think about that entry point and what's happening at JFK. And that's the same level of treatment that we need to make within Manhattan and the boroughs.
So I just want to ask a little bit about, I think, first of all, these are crucial projects for New York, Gateway and the new bus terminal, arguably, in a similar vein, certainly taking what's working about Moynihan and applying it to the rest of Penn Station. But I'm going to try to take the role of a showgoer, a theater goer, a Broadway performer maybe, and say, like, I can't wait 13 years for 8th Avenue to improve, I can't wait 18 years for better regional transportation access. So I'm curious, and this is for all of you, ideas that we could do now. They may take 6 months or a year or two, and certainly when you talk about public safety, council member, you were talking about some things that are more immediate than that, but also that same person might say, and if you're telling me I need to wait for the next, federal government, not the one we've got, right now, I can't wait that long. So I'm curious, what else can we do now, whether that's public realm, public safety, transportation, or some of the other things that really you think could actually improve the experience of living, working, and playing in this district? I'm David, I'm looking at you, but
well, because
free.
it's just so funny because the response I was having too with the living in New Jersey is I saw the press conference and they said, great news, we're doing all these amazing fixes and your lives are going to get 1,000 times better in 20 years. And you're sitting there going like, okay, and there's a lot. And
7
so,
years, but
and so like you look at it, I think part of it is like, what could we be doing? One thing is whether maybe one idea that's been in my head for a while is like a PSA campaign to the suburbs, which I think should be supported by New York City Tourism and Conventions, or whatever entity we decide to use. But we need to be on the proactive. I mean, 2026 in New York City is going to be incredible. I mean, there's so many things that are happening between the World Cup. There's all these different anniversaries. If you look at it, it's going to be an amazing banner year in the city. I think it's pretty straightforward that's going to happen. But I think for the suburbs, I think it's information wars in many respects. And we need to be proactive, and money needs to be invested to, and in some respects, think of the suburbs a little bit more as tourism in a way, is a way of promoting and putting out energy that this is an amazing city to be in and reinforcing it. And it just takes investment. You can't sit. I hear, when I think about, we're going to change out the tunnel, I'm saying to myself, so that means this is going to get worse before it gets better. Without question, right? How are they going to fix it? And so if we assume, this is where all just comes to communication. If we know the reality of what it's going to be, let's try to address it as best we can through how we communicate. Because that's one of the common themes, is perception over reality. And that comes with communication. So to me, I would love to see more investment on how we're working on that communication, whether that's in the PSA campaign, and there's infrastructure. I think the folks at Tourism and Conventions, full transparency, I'm on the board of that organization, I think is just totally underfunded and needs to be doing more and can do more to support the city.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, Tom, anybody else who wants to jump in with their ideas for what we should be doing now?
So there is a hassle factor that starts the minute you leave your house on your commute into Midtown, into the Times Square area. Then once you get here, you have that Penn Station to Times Square experience. You have Elmo, you have Cookie Monster, you have the pedicabs, the illegal pot stores, the illegal purses. I think that the hassle factor has reached its tipping point, and the only way to sort of remove the hassle is to have a comprehensive strategy to deal with the entire area that is going to address all of these issues. Some of them could be done overnight, some of them it's enforcement, some of it it's like whack-a-mole, but to say that it's too difficult is to give up. We need to all come together as a community and sort of demand that. We need to demand better for the theater district. We're 0.1, and Ellen's going to get upset about me for this stat, but it's the latest we have. We're 0.1% of the city's landmass. We're 15% of the economic output of the city. I think Charlie or someone said if Times Square, if the theater district doesn't survive, the city doesn't survive. I honestly think Mayor Adams gets that, DA Bragg gets that. They have this, I can't think of the name as I look at Estelle, the Midtown Community Interagency Coalition, which is a group of all of the city agencies working together to solve the problem. Some of the things we could solve
call it the
tomorrow.
hub.
The hub. They didn't like the hub.
I know.
The hub was
So
so
much
easy.
easier, though.
The hub, the Midtown hub was so easy. But it has addressed some of these problems, and I'm very optimistic about Deputy Mayor Chauncey Parker. He really seems like he's trying to get all the city agencies working together. We need to, as a community, work together and challenge all of the city agencies, state elected officials, to work to make Midtown, make Times Square, make the theater district a place where people want to come. We could do all of the programming that we want. If people don't leave their couch because of the hassle factor, it's not going to have the impact that we want.
And I'd just like to add, we should look at the physical, we should look at 8th Avenue itself. That piece of where the theater district, that is the front door to the theater district for many people. The things that happen there as we have made changes to 8th Avenue, putting in left turn lanes and bicycle lanes and more pedestrian access on the sidewalks, there were unintended consequences that happened there. So when CVS has a semi-trailer unloading, toothpaste in front of that CVS on 44th Street, traffic gets blocked up for blocks. So I think we need to look at this in a more holistic way, that corridor from 42nd, north of the Port Authority, up to 50th or 55th Street. I'm not sure where you would stop, and all the streets to the east and to the west. All of that as a district, and really take a fresh look at it from a planning perspective. Or are we doing what we should be doing? And some of these things are clearly physical and challenging and will take a long time. Some of them are just a little bit of common sense. Maybe we shouldn't have a street fair on a Saturday on matinee day when in the middle of the summer, who is that street fair for? It's not residents. They don't, it's the people there don't need tube socks and tweezers or whatever happens in the street fair. So why do we do that and then cause traffic to back up all the way for blocks, all the way into New Jersey when we do that? Maybe we should look at some simple things like that are doable literally by a stroke of a pen. And I know it's not that simple, and sometimes the hardest thing to do is to make that pen move, but we should really look at some of those things.
Historically, one of the big problems on 8th Avenue was the congestion on the sidewalk, to the point where people would be walking in the street because the sidewalks were so crowded. So the city added pedestrian space in the street along with the bike lane. Drivers are complaining about that because of the high volume of cars in the street. I wish there was some kind of program that would reduce the number of drivers coming into Manhattan. I don't know what we could call it.
Another hassle.
But look, you look at the cars coming in, historically, on 9th Avenue, 8th Avenue, gridlock, there's one person behind the wheel of each car. Tremendous inconvenience. What I'm hoping is that with congestion pricing for the people who do need to drive in, the people who do want badly to drive in, that they'll be able to have a pleasant experience, much more swift, with less gridlock for our residents who live there, and we could also have the pedestrian space and bike safety infrastructure that we need.
Just one thing about the theater I want to add. We have to make sure we remember seniors and the mobility challenge and figure out that we can't be so draconian that we're asking people who have real issues to walk from 9th Avenue or from someplace else to get to the theater. That's something that we will have to bake into this system as that population grows.
And I'm going to make a suggestion, speaking outside of my lane, but we talk a lot about the physical improvements, and it's all critical. But I see a real need for revisiting the retail environment, revisiting the restaurant environment. When I go to a new city, I look for what's authentic, what is kind of unique to that place. I don't want to go to the same stores that I can, the Sephoras and the H&Ms that I can get anywhere. When I look at some of the stores that have popped up, like in Soho, I mean, they have these cult followings where people young people stand outside in line to go into a Glossier. It doesn't, I don't
get it.
I don't get it. But, they've become these sort of, real sort of underground, I don't even know if it's underground, but these attractions. And if you're from out of town and you're looking for where do I go to shop for something that I can't get at home, I don't think you would find that in Times Square, right? You're going to get all the same stuff. And if you're a New Yorker, you really, there are no offerings that are appealing to someone who lives here.
I want to keep going on this topic, and I think asking again for other sort of specific next steps. I'm going to throw out a couple questions, and I'm open to whoever wants to jump in first. But Tom, certainly for you on the public safety issues, we know that there's a lot that has to be upstream of enforcement. But with a new police commissioner and with the district attorney coming up in just a few minutes, I am curious to hear your thoughts about what's your advice for our law enforcement leaders. What would your advice be to the police commissioner, to the district attorney, about what's needed in the district? Maybe we can start there, and then I have a couple other thoughts about other ideas I'd like to hear from you all.
So first, we ran into, if you look at our history, in the 70s, we put handcuffs on the police officers, and we told them, don't be police officers because of the threat of corruption. I think it was right after the Knapp Commission. And then in the 90s, we took the handcuffs off the police officers, and we had experience of crime going down, and I think it was at its lowest levels in 2018. We need to find a balance. So we need to, and I think Commissioner Tisch is going to be, and I will say this, going to be the best police commissioner that this city has seen, just based on her knowledge, her desire, and just she doesn't have a lot of the baggage that someone who may have grown up in law enforcement has. So she'll be able to affect real change. So I think that you need to make sure that the police feel empowered to do their job, and you need to support them. You need to have a criminal justice system that supports them, and they see that there are consequences for actions. So that's beyond the police department. That gets into the elected officials and some of the challenges that we face. So again, we cite 2001 or 2000 in other mayors as, wow, things were so good there. No, crime was probably up 50%. It was probably 50% or more than it is now at that time. The problem is that we don't have a sense that we're all working together. When Mayor Giuliani was the mayor, the city council, the state, the governor, everyone was working together. All of the oars were in the water, rowing in the same direction. Now we don't seem to agree on what the problem is, let alone the solution. So I think this is a matter of convening folks setting the priorities, setting the course, and just saying that public safety is the most important thing that government does. All of government has to work together to achieve that public safety. And it's also a team sport. We're all part of making the city safer. So we all have to work together with our elected officials, with the police, for that safer city. So that would be my take on it.
I appreciate that, Tom. Councilmember Kier, if you want to respond to that. Other thoughts?
Here's my advice to Commissioner Tisch. Embrace community policing in a real way. Residents of all communities, they want to see the cops getting out of the cars and walking the beat in a friendly way, knowing the shop owners, knowing the community members, knowing the block presidents, knowing the crossing guards, walking through our neighborhoods, helping to work through public safety issues in a neighborhood-based way. Right now, the cops are in cars racing to and fro, responding to an emergency, and people don't feel a positive connection to their local precincts. One of the issues with that we keep hearing from the precinct commanders is that they don't have the head count to have officers out walking the beat because they're busy responding in an urgent way in cars to 911 calls. So I do believe that we need to address issues with the head count if we want real community policing, if we want a consistent presence of the same officers in a given area over a period of time so they have a connection with communities. I believe if this police commissioner could achieve that we would be able to restore a real sense of safety in our neighborhoods and not make our neighborhoods choose between over-policing and under-policing. I believe that this commissioner can do it in partnership with this city council, this mayor, and all of us here today.
Thanks, Councilmember. Let me ask one more question about what it would take to bring more people back to the district. I think we've talked now quite a bit about public safety. I think we've scratched the surface around public realm, and I think there's probably more there. We only talked a little bit about transportation, and it seems like there's some issues there too. And I guess I would tee this up by saying, you know, and to your point, Tom, about the hassle factor. You know, when you think about what it is that's maybe keeping people away, at the same time as there's more things keeping them at home. You know, you can stream anything in the world from the comfort of your apartment. You know, things have gotten more expensive. Transportation hasn't gotten any easier. So and people are working from home. In many cases, it's only a couple days a week, but then you see a 15 or 20% drop in foot traffic, and that starts to check out. So, you know, I'd like to ask, I think, a couple related questions here, open to anybody who wants to jump in. One of the areas where we kind of see, I think, those lingering scars, and you just mentioned it earlier, Jimmy, is around the streetscape, the storefront landscape. Some of it is maybe just what's in those storefronts. In other cases, a policy success. You know, the closure of so many of the unlicensed pot shops has now led to an increase yet again in storefront vacancies. And you really see it on 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue, where it seems like a lot of those storefronts in the past 4 years were illegal weed stores. So one question there is, what can policymakers do to support a healthier storefront landscape, given that retail faces a lot of big challenges right now? A second dimension of this that I wanted to put out there is, what else could we be doing as a city to get more folks back to be working in the district? Maybe it's just one more day a week than they are right now. Are there things that we could be doing that would help? Maybe there are transportation issues that, you know, it strikes me that certainly when it comes to regional rail, you know, the theaters all let out on a Friday night, and then you might be waiting an hour for a Long Island Railroad train or a Metro North train at that time of night. It's a real inconvenience for somebody that's just trying to get in and out, even within the 5 boroughs. You know, and then one third dimension, and I'll open up these questions to everybody, is, are there things that we should be doing, and maybe this is a question for Tom, that would actually help bring more foot traffic into the district, because more of the buildings that are under-tenanted right now could be better activated? And I'm thinking most recently the announcement of 5 Times Square, you know, office to residential conversion projects. Are there opportunities for more of that? Are there other things that we should be doing with the underutilized space? Maybe that's space for the arts. Maybe that's a vertical Brooklyn Navy Yard. Maybe there's other things that we haven't kind of attempted in the district that would have the added bonus of getting more people into the district. So I'm putting all this on the table because I don't want to kind of jump in with a bunch more questions. I'd love to hear all your thoughts about these things. What more, you know, next steps you think are needed, where we could make more progress in getting people into the district, reducing some of those hassles, increasing the foot traffic?
I'd like to start with demand generation. One of the things that has happened due to hybrid work and work from home is that we have people, it is more of an effort to go to the theater for someone who lives in the suburbs and used to work down the street than it is now. That hurdle is higher. We need to communicate to the people who live in the suburbs about what exactly this city is all about, the cultural riches, what Broadway is all about, with some positive marketing messages. We're not good at that, and Damien alluded to it before. We have a real communication problem when people get most of their news from the Post, or too much of their news from the Post and Fox News, and it looks like it is Armageddon in Midtown every day, which is very much not the case. We don't have the funding at the moment to do a proper campaign, and this is where New York City tourism needs to be fully funded, needs to be funded to a level that actually creates, where we can create a campaign. Everybody loved I Love New York many, many years ago. Of course, that was a state program, but it still resonates today because it was so effective marketing New York City and New York State. The message that we had was, we're making New York City safer. Look, we have National Guard with long guns in all of our subway stations. Really? That's a marketing story? So people don't want to feel that the city is a little bit safer than they thought it was. They want to get pulled. They want to say, oh my God, there's so much to see on Broadway, and these museums here in Manhattan, as well as in the 5 boroughs, there's so much to do. I need to get myself back here. This is the reason I live in this region in the first place. And that takes an actual campaign, and that takes a fully funded tourism effort that rivals the other cities across America. New York City tourism has a budget that is half of Los Angeles, for instance, for tourism promotion. Our budget is less than San Diego, with half as many hotel rooms in San Diego, or fewer than half as many. So we don't actually put effort into these things. We don't have a campaign. And I think we need to go back to some basics like that. It's real city marketing.
No, just to build it, I totally agree. And I think sometimes I'll just hear there's politicians or something in the space saying New York always comes back. And yeah, but I think the dynamics are very different.
I always say that.
Yeah, and I believe that's why, I've invested my entire life here, and I want my business here, and I think it's successful. But I think the dynamics are changed. The sense of place with remote communications has changed. I have about 150 employees, about a third of them are all over the world at this point. They don't need to be here. And wearing strictly an employer's hat, why are we often paying New York City salaries when you could, all the dynamics play out, things are just different. New York is what they say, it's one of the best places to spend your money. And we need to communicate that. And at the end of the day, one of the reasons we did some of our initial research of why people weren't coming back to Broadway, in particular, is there's something they had communicated, there's just nothing that I actually really want to see, which was also they didn't even know what was possible to see. We were not doing a good job communicating that. So we need to create experiences worth experiencing, to be on the proactive to create demand, which I think New York City and the artists in the space do really, really well. But we need muscle and power, and Charlie was just referencing. We're living a little bit of the days of old, and we cannot take that for granted. There's just way too much pressure, and I think the total set of how we consume our news is different. So what people's communication points are getting on their perception of New York City, we're not gonna be able to control that. We all get our own news cycles. We all have our own individual feeds. That's only become more and more. We need to be proactive and on the front end of that, of putting out not just positivity, the truth of New York City and the amazing experiences that are coming out of here. So,
I would love Times Square to be more than Times Square. I'm thinking as I walk through the district, particularly going cross town, that it's the side street, the east-west streets that don't get the attention, right? So psychologically, if I think about Times Square and Bryant Park, they seem, miles apart. But really, it's a handful of blocks. And without, if you're showing up for a Broadway play, you don't know the area, and, you're being told, well, there's other really interesting things to do in the city, that seems like a real slog, right? Oh, I'm going to have to take a cab or a train to go to some other neighborhood for another attraction. When really what you want to do is be able to wander around the district, find interesting restaurants, stores, find another neighborhood that's really not so far away, and how do we make that safer, more interesting, easy? And I don't think that ease factor is there right now.
We don't need to come back, we need to move forward. We are back. So I would just say that we need to find what the new norm is, find ways to attract a different audience or that old audience back. With the Tri-Staters, we can create the greatest space in the world. We need that funding for NYC Tourism. I'll be the third board member to say that from NYC Tourism. It is underfunded. That marketing campaign would be great. To what Eli said about the illegal weed stores and the retail vacancies, we had 13 illegal weed stores. We worked very hard to get 9 of them closed. The other 4 of them have been a little bit more difficult due to some of the convoluted state laws. Of those 9 stores that we closed, 5 of them have reopened as another business. 2 of them are under construction, presumably opening up. So we really only lost 2. When we look at the overall retail in Times Square, we actually picked up a percentage point in December. Our vacancy was 12%. Now it's 11%. We would like it to be 3%, 4%, but we're going to take the 11 and say that there's room for improvement. As far as the types of retail that we have yet to find ways to curate retail and to get a developer who has a huge mortgage to take a small mom and pop or bespoke store over a chain that is going to pay the rent every single month. So that's a challenge. If anyone has a solution, tom@tsq.org. I would love to hear it. As far as the residential, we found and we saw different neighborhoods throughout the city that had that mixed use recover a little bit better. We have what they don't have. We have Broadway. You could go throughout the entire world and there is only one Broadway. So that's something that we need to cherish, and we would be a better community if we could find a little bit more residential within that mix. I'm optimistic. 5 Times Square is nice. There's a couple of developments just to the west of us on 43rd Street, 44th Street, to add more residents to the area. If people are closer to their jobs, they're going to come to work more. They're going to play more in the neighborhood. That's going to help Broadway. There's a rezoning plan to the south of Times Square that I think is going to help feed our neighborhood with those residences. So I think finding our new normal and finding opportunities there and creating the best space possible is going to be what brings people back. And I can't wait to see Smash. So I just, it's gonna. I think it's in previews in March.
Can I suppose one thought? I spent a lot of time working with the audiences. I'm in the marketing space, so I see all the sales reports, and I've been doing this for 20 years. I think and we talk about how amazing Broadway is as an experience, because it is. It changed. I believe the arts are like avocado for the soul, and they do amazing things for us. And every year, Broadway sits usually somewhere between 85 and 95% capacity. I'm oversimplifying, but Broadway's in a very strong industry. At the same time, if you run the math, there's about somewhere between around 1.5 million seats that go empty every year. Somewhere around there, 1 million to 2 million seats that go empty every year. And to me, there's and they're very reasonably predictable of when there's softness in the market. Usually in January and February, usually in September and October. At the same time, there are students in New York City and the suburbs, wherever you want to go, that right now need help. Arts and culture is not in classrooms as much as it used to be. We're coming out of the COVID. It's like we're going backwards with education. And if I've sat in enough conferences with New York City leaders, when we talk about education, the money that's been poured into it, everyone kind of looks around each other and shrugs their shoulders and go, yeah, we got a problem. I don't think the answer is necessarily inside the classrooms, potentially. But I also think that there's a massive opportunity of an exchange, a private-public type partnership that should happen with the cultural institutions in the city, whether that's Broadway, the opera, performing arts institutions. There's an untapped equity of seats going empty every single night in the city at exactly the moments in which the schools are in session to which they would use them. There's matches to be made right there. Right now, the producers are getting $0 for an empty seat. Even if they got $10 a ticket, $20 a ticket, there's an exchange to be had there. And it drives me nuts because I see it every year. It's very predictable. You look at it right now. You could predict within reason, even if within a 25% of that inventory to move it. With the folks in this room or the people online, I think that there's an opportunity. And listen, there's Broadway bridges at the league. Broadway does a lot. The Schubert organization does a ton in trying to do this. But if government were to step in, the local government and local partnerships with schools, and I run also a nonprofit called Situation Project in which we do this. We connect that. We've brought about 100,000 students over 10 years. But 100,000, it's great, but it's nothing compared to what's required. But I really wish, it's so obvious to me, but pulling those resources together, I think, have a profound impact on students' lives, and at least it's an idea to move forward. Plus, it brings people into Times Square. When you bring kids, where else, I think about when I go into a theater, where else do you often, if you look at the theater demographics, the top 10% of the income ladder, often sitting side by side with often the bottom 10% of the income ladder, which is many of the students that we work with, where they could sit shoulder to shoulder. Theater has an amazing ability to bring communities together, and I think for Times Square, getting more of the locals into Times Square just shows it's a sense of more community. I think there's an opportunity there, and I'd love to talk about it if anyone afterward wants to find it.
That's great, David. Thank you. On that note, with the concrete idea, yet another good idea on the table, I'd love to turn it over to our audience. So we have time for just a couple questions, and then we're going to move directly into our conversation with DA Bragg. So how this will work, we've got my colleagues are on either side with microphones. Throw your hand up if you have a question. Right here, and we'll start in the middle. Let us know your name. If you're here with an organization, just wait for that microphone so folks can hear you. And please try to keep your question brief so that we can get to as many as possible.
I have a microphone.
Microphone right there on your right, sir. Yep.
Thank you. My name is Maarten van der Sman. I'm a Dutch New Yorker. We have some history around here. I am latching on to the whack-a-mole question that nobody has addressed. Who's going to whack Eric Adams?
Great, sir. Questions? We're going to head up to the fifth row there on the right. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Jamie Bartlett. I am a theater producer. We talked briefly about congestion pricing, which hopefully will decrease traffic and cars, but there's been concern within the theater industry that that's another expense to get people.
I know, I brought it up.
I know, I'm glad you did.
So am I.
Not only are tickets so expensive, but it's also so expensive to get into the city to see the show. How do you feel that will affect ticket buying, and perhaps how do we communicate to these regional theater goers that that additional price is justified?
I mean, that's a great question, and I feel like this. I'll wear two hats. I'll wear the New Jersey commuter hat, where it's just like, you know what? If you want to drive, it's gonna be a lot more expensive to take public transportation, which you can't trust will show up. That's effectively what the message is. So in theory, I'm all for the idea of it, but in practice, until the infrastructure is where it needs to be, it's hugely problematic. Wearing my marketing hat, this goes back to my core point. We need to be bullish on the magic of Broadway. People will spend exorbitant amounts of money to feel an experience worth experiencing. There's all the research that shows that. We need to put on amazing shows, which we were doing. And by the way, look at the star power on Broadway right now. If I were a superstar, I don't think I'd go up on a Broadway stage. I'd be petrified. There's more downside than upside. People tear you apart in the press, all these different elements, and yet they continue to come back because there's only one stage to do it. I think it's one of the surest signs of health of the industry, of the artists that continue to come back and perform. We need to lean into that and communicate that as much as humanly possible, and continue to put on amazing shows. And I think Broadway is actually doing a really good job of that right now. But I would not I don't know how we proactively communicate. It's not that bad, the expense. We just have to power through it.
I want to follow up on that because Damien, of course, is completely right. We need to communicate why this is so special to do. But it's also good for us to be mindful of the fact that the vast majority of suburban attendees to the theater actually take public transportation. The car drivers are a small segment of people who go to Broadway. They're a very vocal segment, and we don't want to lose anybody. But congestion pricing of one sort or another has been in place in all kinds of ways. The parking garages congestion priced when they raised the price from $40 to $70 to come to the theater district. So these things already happened, and clearly we don't want anything that raises the price of a theater ticket to people. There's no question. So I'm not suggesting that it's a good thing for theater goers, but the benefit of having really the promise of a transit system regionally that serves all the people, I think is worth keeping our eye on for the future. And it's why this is clearly a pain point. We'll have to see what the numbers are, but I'm not expecting that we're going to see theater going from the suburbs have a demonstrative drop-off due to congestion pricing. I give that to you.
Let me give a crack at some messaging for congestion pricing. Average price of a Broadway ticket, give or take, $130. Dinner for two, $100, $50 a head at least. $9 to drive in per car. 2 people, that's $4.50 a head. 4 people in the car, it's $2.25 a head. This is not the huge expense for showgoers that is being portrayed. And as Charles said, vast majority of theater goers already take public transportation. So for the folks who do need to take public transportation because of mobility issues or because currently the train route is so convoluted, it would take so long, that's something that hopefully congestion pricing will help fix. They do need to drive in. They'll be able to get in half the time and for not the huge expense that is being portrayed.
So if, could I just,
Sure,
I'll try to be quick. Okay, so we need a safe, reliable, affordable, equitable transit system. So I just want to start off saying that. I don't think that the people south of 60th Street should fund a transit system for the entire system. So I would say that at a time when no one is meeting up in Harlem saying how to bring people back to Harlem, we're meeting in the theater district that is directly affected by that. I'm not sure. I took my family to see a show. I think it was well over $1,000 between dinner and everything. So I'm not so sure that $9 would move the needle. But it might move the needle for the dresser. It might move the needle for the stagehand. It might move the needle for the employees in the theater district who don't have, who only have a hope of better transit at midnight to get home. So that is my concern. Not so much the theater goer, which to the council members' point is just a small fraction, but it's those workers. It's the hotel worker. It's the restaurant worker that at 2 o'clock in the morning, do we all feel comfortable saying that it is 100% safe for that person to take public transportation when they were driving, and that $9 might tip the needle? So I'd like to see the program evaluated after the 6 months, come up with meaningful measures of success, and also look at the unintended consequences and make sure that less competent workers aren't one of those unintended consequences where workers pick other places to work and we don't have the best talent here.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. It's all the time we have for this first panel. If folks in the audience can join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much. It's been a total pleasure.
Thanks for building this set for us.
Yeah, it was our pleasure, just be able to whip it up in an afternoon. Thank you, Tom. And please don't go anywhere because we're going to move directly into our fireside chat with D.A. Bragg. And if the district attorney could come and join me on stage, that would be great. Thank you, Councilmember. That's great. Hey, thanks, Dave. Thank you very much. Great job. Thank you all again for joining us. If folks are just tuning in now online, we are just moments away from our fireside chat with District Attorney Alvin Bragg, so stay tuned. Folks here in the room, thank you again for joining us today. Hopefully it'll be slightly warmer when you leave than it was when you came in. And we will take a few questions as well. District Attorney, thanks for joining us. Oh, anywhere's good. Yeah, you have a lot of choice. They'll come join you. Yeah, right there in the middle is perfect. Let's do that. Well, District Attorney Bragg, welcome. My name is Eli Dvorkin. I'm the Editorial and Policy Director at Center for an Urban Future. It's such a pleasure to meet you, to be here with you today. Thank you for joining us. And you're also joined by a little over 100 people, or maybe a few more, who are tuned in to stream this event online, all eager to hear your thoughts about the future of public safety here in the Theater District. So let me just begin by saying, well, first of all, we were so grateful for you taking the time to do this. I know it's been a fairly quiet few months for you, so maybe I don't know if this was too challenging to fit into your schedule, but truly we're so grateful for your time. Setting the table a little bit, we started off and we just heard this amazing first panel talking about how important Broadway is for New York City's economy, for our cultural life, and really as a key anchor and engine of the region. And while Broadway has seen a lot of successes in recent years artistically, seen an amazing rebound from the depths of the pandemic, still patronage and revenues are down 15-17% from where they were in their kind of peak 2018-2019 season. And a key contributor to that is a decline in regional visitors, even as we've seen that tourism is about to and may well exceed its pre-pandemic numbers in 2025. But we're not all the way back everywhere you look, and one of those areas where we're still not all the way back is with folks coming in from the surrounding counties, from New Jersey, from Westchester, and Long Island. We've heard a few reasons for why that is, including challenges with regional transportation and the experience in the public realm, congestion in our streets, but also on our sidewalks. But one of the issues that we heard maybe more than any other are fears, both real and perceived, around public safety. We've looked at the data. We also heard from some of the folks in the previous panel that don't only look at the data, because the perception is a reality, and I wanted to ask you about that.
I talk with Tom a lot.
I can imagine.
I wasn't here for that. Tom.
you knew at least a couple of panelists brought that up. But I wanted to start with the data, as I know your office is really kind of driven by the facts. And one of the data points that jumps out at me is over the past 2 years, we've seen the 7 major crime categories decline here in this district. At the same time, we've seen felony assault up about 10%. We've seen petty larceny up almost 30%, which seems like a pretty significant jump. And so we know that while there's challenges around perception, there's also some challenges around reality. So I wanted to start by asking you, District Attorney Bragg, where do you see the biggest reality problems when it comes to public safety in this district? Where do you see the biggest perception problems? And what do you think is most needed to address each side of that equation?
Got it. Well, good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to start by disclosing either you can take it how you want, either a personal conflict or a stake in the game. So I heard folks talking about the last show they went to. The last show I went to was Gypsy. Yeah, all right, yeah. You're Gypsy. My wife's a co-producer on Gypsy. She's in this industry, so I would be here regardless because of the importance of this industry to the city of Manhattan. But also, this is something we talk a lot about in my home because this is her work. So we've been following it on both personal and professional tracks. The issues that are most acute in this neighborhood, by the data, and some of this tracks what we're seeing borough-wide. Felony assaults are the only thing going in the wrong direction in Manhattan. Obviously, we like the slope of everything that's going down to go down more steeply, but felony assaults are going in the wrong direction. In some neighborhoods, that's driven by domestic violence. In many, it's driven, including here, by stranger assaults, which I think are sort of really kind of the scariest things in terms of driving not just reality but also perception, because it can happen at any time, any place, and we all sort of see, kind of have the visual in this weather, someone who doesn't have a shirt on is walking around talking to him or herself. That feels scary, and in fact, the data makes clear that it's happening. So that's the sort of number one. Retail theft, while down in Manhattan, I think also is another sort of driver of both real crime and also perception. Again, some of that driven by mental health, some of it driven by just by opportunism and greed. And then something specific to to this neighborhood that we're seeing, that we're working with the police department on, is pickpocketing. Pickpocketing is something that's hit this neighborhood that hasn't hit others. So that is sort of, those are the issues that we focus on, sort of data-driven, and are putting resources to. What we're doing, I'll start with kind of retail theft, and we're doing this borough-wide, and I've seen some incremental gains, is we know who the recidivists are. In Manhattan, 5% of folks who are arrested for shoplifting account for about a third of the shoplifting complaints. So, like, that's a lot of repeat players. That's sort of persistent data. When I took office, I guess 2021, the year before I took office, 18% of the people arrested for shoplifting accounted for about 45% of the shoplifting arrests. So it seems kind of old school, but we are literally, police precinct by police precinct, logging those folks, have a tickler systems for when they sort of present in our system, and are tracking them and treating them, with significant attention. So that's how we've gotten some of the incremental gains there. Can certainly talk about some of the challenges we're facing, that we're looking for legislative reform, sort of in the discovery, the evidence that we have to produce. That statute has changed, and that's led to a citywide spike in dismissals. There's some things we're looking for in sort of the mental health kind of reforms that would help us address a lot of the mental health crisis that presents in our world. And then I would say something that we're doing in this neighborhood that we're now doing in a few others, and I don't know if there are any other co-chairs here or if Tom mentioned it on the last panel, but we have these kind of very neighborhood-specific hubs where, partnering with a number of mayoral agencies, from Department of Buildings to take down the legal scaffolding, to the Department of Health to engage with the folks with the mental health issue, to my office and the police department to prosecute. And we see, it's very kind of resource intensive, and I commend the mayor and his team at City Hall for dedicating the resources to it. That is also helping with. In particular, you asked me sort of where the most serious pain points are. It's shoplifting and the felony assaults, and here, pickpocketing as well.
That's really helpful, District Attorney, and I want to ask you a little bit more about all of that. But maybe one place to start, because I think it's something that really does feel like a crucial issue for those theater goers that we're talking about, is the feeling of a lack of safety. I would think, in particular, walking up, let's say, 8th Avenue, from Penn Station. Seeing, folks who are experiencing, severe mental illness, seemingly, untreated, without support, seeing, open air drug use, folks who clearly are really struggling with a substance use disorder, but again, don't seem to be connecting to services. And as I think Tom brought up on the last panel, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, many of those folks might have the solution might have been Rikers Island, and we know how inhumane that is for some folks. That was even a death sentence. At the same time, we don't seem to have, or I think I would say the previous panelists and folks that they've surveyed, and the theater goers that they've surveyed, have often responded, we don't feel like there is a solution that we can see. So I'm curious what you see is, I guess there's two questions on this, District Attorney. One is, what is the law enforcement role that you see in that particular crisis? And what else do you need from your partners in government?
So I think the law enforcement role is multifaceted and depends how it's presenting. So someone who has a mental health issue who assaults someone, there's a clear law enforcement role. We're doing that. Those are the felony assault cases. We're doing those, and doing them quite strenuously. The people who are sort of standing around, who give us the feeling of unsafety and may in fact do something unsafe, but we obviously can't bring a case until something is done. On that front, we're trying to work with our partners on prevention. So we've funded in a number of neighborhoods kind of navigators to literally go and intervene. So before that person, does something, this is a $6 million initiative in my office. People who are trained in this, and the person that rightfully all of us would, cross the street, they're crossing the street and engaging with that, with those folks, and we're seeing some success with touch points in terms of connecting those people to services and to housing, and so those are sort of before anything happens. I mentioned sort of these hubs, sort of interdisciplinary. So the mayor's folks are also sort of engaging, particularly the most sort of acute folks, the people who I think all of our eyes are going to, rather than wait for something to happen, doing a specific crisis intervention, sort of, I would say, a step up from sort of the people sort of every day going across the street to help them, like step up to like, hey, we need a ambulance and we're going to do an intervention and we're going to send this person to the hospital. Again, it's very resource intensive, and so it's not a, and I can get to sort of this, kind of what we think the systematic solutions are, but for a neighborhood that needs significant attention, that is so key to, I would say, one, our kind of economic health, but also sort of like who we are. Like Broadway is, it's like existential. You know, someone who's like been here my whole life, you know, you sort of, I tout the things that are special. It's like, you know, I start with the Knicks, full confession, particularly these days, kind of hot. But you know, Broadway, right? I mean, it's definitionally sort of New York and Manhattan. And so my argument to the rest of the city, when we sort of, the hub issue and some of the things we're funding, they're now being replicated in other boroughs. I say, obviously, in a self-interested way, but I think objectively true. It's like the way this neighborhood looks is going to affect how, you know, people in Westchester and Nassau and New Jersey feel about the city more so than, and I won't pick on any other neighborhood in the city, but more so really than any other neighborhood, certainly neighborhoods in other boroughs. So I think the kind of the resource-intensive kind of, I would say almost ad hoc, and I do want to talk at a certain point about the kind of more systematic. So that's the front end, the prevention, and then in my office, you know, we're bringing the cases. We're bringing the cases if someone, you know, is assaulting someone, if someone is stealing from Dwayne Reed, you know, we're doing those cases. If someone is doing sort of, you know, something that we don't really have great tools for, sort of the low-level sort of drug use is not something that we sort of have a great criminal tool for. But if they're arrested, we are sort of have a similar intervention in our courtrooms. The sort of folks who are out in the streets, the community navigators, we have an analog, our courtroom navigators, and they're intervening whenever anyone leaves court, asking them what they need. We've had a lot of success connecting people to resources that way, and I think that's how we're sort of bending the curve. So that's some of the ways that my office is involved in the issues you mentioned.
But I want to follow up a little bit on the point around you know, mental illness and also substance use. You know, and these get into some challenging policy questions. And so I'm curious your thoughts about what you think the mayor and the governor, you know, should be doing to support in these areas. You know, a couple of things that come to mind for me. You know, one is certainly the challenges or the issues around involuntary hospitalization. You know, should somebody be taken off the street who is not willing to accept treatment? For something like substance use, I'm curious, you know, do you see a future for more things like supervised, you know, drug use sites? Or as some states have been moving the opposite direction, you know, states that have decriminalized are, you know, moving back the other direction. What are your thoughts on the policies there?
So let me look. We have a few neighborhoods that have significant concentration: East Harlem, Washington Heights, and in this neighborhood of just start first with like treatment facilities. And Washington Heights and East Harlem has the kind of service providers that you're talking about. And look, they've created significant negative externalities. And so I think we have to be really mindful of that, and also the over-concentration in particular neighborhoods and the public safety implications. So it's something that we're talking to sort of, one, the providers about being a good neighbor, two, to the neighbors about what their needs are, because we have seen this time and time again, the kind of spillover on neighborhood conditions. So I am, you know, I'm not a mental health professional, not a substance use professional. We've seen great interventions. My office has sort of, you know, doubled our footprint on sort of our problem-solving course, where people are within the context of a criminal case getting connected to services. But the concentration of these services in particular neighborhoods, I mean, unquestionably in my mind, has led to a number of both real and perceived, very much, I put the emphasis really on real here, in the neighborhoods that I mentioned. So in terms of the substance use, my office is firmly committed to it when we bring a case, so a shoplifting case, or, you know, case where it's sort of motivated by substance use. Our use of our problem-solving courts, which means that so the way it's resolved is, you know, not Rikers, but an intensive, generally about 18 months of intervention, and our recidivism rates for our graduates coming out of those problem-solving courts are far better than our recidivism rates for traditional court. So we've invested in that and will continue to. But I think we have to kind of look at that side by side with what it's doing. I mean, that's once we bring a case. That I think is a different issue from and I can think of 3 off the top of my mind. Just using the 3 neighborhoods that are bearing, I think, an undue cost. And I mean, this is one of them. And I think it's something that in the kind of biweekly hub meetings when we're talking about it is tracing back to sort of like, well, which treatment center was responsible for all these vials being left here? We need to focus on that, and that's something we've been doing, working with sanitation. I feel like I'm giving a long answer, but I'm happy to do mental health
helpful.
if you want me to.
You know, that's very helpful, and I think you know, it tees us up to talk a little bit more about some of the other kind of specific policy changes or investments that are needed. I mean, a couple of things that you've said, District Attorney, that stick with me already. Certainly, the data around recidivism, and specifically that so many of the challenges, the public safety challenges here in the district in particular, and I think across the city in general, are folks who are repeatedly, you know, engaging in these activities. Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts about what are the tools, either the ones that you have today that are working, or where you need policy changes or new investments that would be more effective in reducing recidivism and helping to ensure that the relatively small number of folks who maybe repeatedly commit violent offenses are actually able to, you know, to be safely, you know, taken out of the community. And maybe most importantly, that would be effective in actually reducing recidivism. What can you do? What can't you do that where you need help from other parts of government?
Glad you asked. So there are a couple of things that we've been pushing vigorously in Albany that I think would go a long way to addressing recidivism. I mentioned one, which is our disclosure law, discovery law. So I became a prosecutor in 2003. Not a foreign concept. You have the evidence, you have to turn it over to the defense. The statute changed a few years ago. We have to turn over more evidence sooner. That's sort of been the nature of my practice generally as a prosecutor. The most significant problem with the statute is the remedy. If a document or documents are inadvertently not disclosed, a lot of the courts are dismissing our cases. And they're happening in a lot of the cases that we've been talking about. So the shoplifting case, the sort of the misdemeanor docket, the sort of order of maintenance, if you will. And so if you don't adjudicate a case to sort of guilt or innocence or guilt or non-guilt, and it just sort of gets dismissed for this reason, that's producing, I mean, citywide, the spike is astronomical. And I'll just give a couple of examples. The ones that I've been sort of using in Albany that I think have moved the needle a little bit, which are not from retail theft, but in domestic violence. So we have, you know, for example, a case where we located an inculpatory photo depicting injuries of a domestic violence survivor after the time to produce the evidence. No allegation of bad faith. It was just inadvertently not located. Judge, we found this. We're turning over. Here's this photo. It supports our case. We just won't use it. And if the defense can find some use that we can't conceive of to use it, no objection. Ruling, case dismissed, right? So then that's a person who we allege and we believe and have proof committed an assault, case dismissed. Another example, and I find these examples very resonant in Albany of sort of domestic violence examples. Another one, you know, we routinely connect, and it's a sort of a point of pride in our office, our emergency services to all sorts of victims are up about 300% in the office. So we routinely do that. It's a benefit to, you know, change a lock, to arrange for counseling for a victim of a crime. And so we should produce that so the defense knows about it. They can cross-examine on it. We do that in a domestic violence case, turn it over, didn't turn over in a timely way the underlying administrative packet. So think something like an Uber receipt. That case was dismissed. Multiply that, you know, times a whole lot, and then multiply it times 5 boroughs, and that's a lot of recidivism. So we are looking to, at a minimum, change the relief, right? Tell us we can't use the evidence, tell us some other sort of sanction, but don't dismiss the case so that we can adjudicate the case and not have sort of this you know, person put back out with no accountability. That's the number one thing. I think that would help the borough, would help the city, it would certainly help the issue that you know, this neighborhood here. On mental health, there are a number of things. We want more funding for our problem-solving courts. I just talked about the efficacy there. We need, you talked about Rikers. We need a secure facility to send people with mental health, right? Right now, judges are faced with, the fork in the road of this person can't safely be out in the streets, and my other alternative is Rikers, where I know the underlying mental health issue won't get addressed, and the person will be back out in 6 months. We've solved nothing. We handle some of that through our problem-solving courts, but there's some people that are just not appropriate for the problem-solving courts, and so this is more of a longer-term investment that we just need more facilities like that. A shorter-term one, and again, this is just another, I think, just gap in the law that we need to fix. Going back to felony assaults, a lot of the stranger felony assaults, and again, I think this is the sort of scariest thing in my mind that we're facing, are driven by mental health. And not just mental health, serious mental illness. We looked at the docket, we've been doing an analysis of all our felony assaults, and what is driving a number of them are not just mental health issue, but a judge is finding the person is not competent to stand trial, not fit, which just fundamentally means like they don't know right from wrong, they can't assist in their defense, they're just not there, right? If it's a felony, and a felony assault, what happens is you go to a facility and you get treatment until you're restored, and then we adjudicate the case goes forward. If it's a misdemeanor assault, the case gets dismissed. So the person's then out amongst us. That's just by operation of law, with no scaffolding, no, I shouldn't say no, insignificant amount of scaffolding to address the mental health fitness issue. And again, this is someone who's, a judge has said is not competent to stand trial, case goes away, person is basically sent back to our neighborhoods. So we need to, and we've been talking about sort of how to address that issue. And just to sort of round that point out, because it's probably not clear. Well, what's the difference between the felony and the misdemeanor? Sometimes it's just happenstance. If you punch me, and you're really strong, and I've got a weak chin, and I have significant physical injury, that's going to be an assault that's a felony. If you punch me, and your punch is not so great, or and I've got a strong chin, I don't have significant physical injury, you still punch me. And if you punch me in front of everyone here, I think regardless of my injury, I think everyone would think that would be wild and criminal, and please don't do it.
I met your security a little earlier today, so I don't think that's a good choice. But
that would be a misdemeanor, right? And now, yes, in terms of resulting harm, which is the concept in the law, it is less significant, and it's a misdemeanor, but it would still be wild, and it would be a crime. So that would be dismissed if you're clearly competent. But if you were not, right, that would be. So those are two things that we put our fingers on that if addressed would go a long way to addressing the things that are the felony assaults and the retail theft, which are the things that we are kind of focused on. The pickpocketing, which I mentioned earlier, is sort of separate and apart. It's specific to this neighborhood. We've got some specific interventions with NYPD, and may or may not be in some instances organized. And so I put that to the side. But to the two other big issues, those legislative changes would go a long way.
Well, that's really helpful, and obviously timely, coming up with the legislative season in Albany. But there's other folks in government that I think would be interested to hear your thoughts. One of those folks we talked about a little earlier is our new police commissioner, and I'm sure you've had conversations already. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what would your advice be to the new commissioner in general, but maybe specifically around if the police are going to be more effective as partners to your office, as contributors to a sustained decrease in crime? What's your advice there?
Well, I say as a general matter, I'm generally not presumptuous enough to that. I'm trying to run my own office, so I'm not going to presume what to tell the police commissioner. But I will say this, she's been there for about a month. We've had a couple of matters that we spent a lot of time on. I've gotten to meet her, knew her a bit as sanitation commissioner. She's a tremendously effective leader. We've talked about some of these issues we've talked about already today. And so I have really, really deep confidence, and particularly as an administrator, you look at me, just for those who don't know the bio, sanitation commissioner, commissioner of IT, and then spent significant time in the NYPD working on IT and data issues, which was very helpful, full background. So I don't have any specific advice beyond these issues that she's already well aware of and that we're already talking about. What I do have is great hope because we've spent some time, not just with her, but I will say, and I'll say this about the police department and also about City Hall. I've been in government since 2003, and sometimes, just you get lucky. I mean, I was sitting across the table yesterday. The general counsel of the NYPD is someone who was a federal prosecutor with me. We're in the office together. The new deputy commissioner for public safety is Chauncey Parker. He's an alum of the Manhattan DA's office. The hub work that we've talked about, the deputy mayor, our new first deputy mayor, Maria Torres Springer. It is a team that we are working without silos across agencies together and having conversations that I think are really productive. And so I have a great hope that the challenges, which are significant, are we have the people in the right places to meet the moment.
Well, that's a really encouraging note heading into the new year, DA Bragg. I wanted to ask you more about your thoughts about the upcoming Broadway season, but rather than that, I wanted to actually turn it over to our audience for just, if you have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. Folks here have questions for the district attorney. Again, throw your hands up and you'll receive a microphone from one of my colleagues. If anybody has questions online, you can tweet us, you can message us on social media. My colleagues will share any questions there. But questions from the audience for District Attorney Bragg, let me see any hands that are up and we can go around the room. And if there are not, I certainly have many more. Let me know if folks have any questions in the back. Am I missing anybody? Well, then, District Attorney, let me ask you one more question while folks are marinating a little bit.
I promise you I'm the least knowledgeable person in the room about the upcoming Broadway season.
Okay, I won't go there. I won't go there. Oh, it's funny, when you mentioned your potential conflict earlier, I wasn't actually thinking, I'm actually producing a Broadway show. So we're only 1 degree removed. But let me ask you something that I think builds off of a couple points. The earlier panel really did talk a lot about the challenge, the perception challenge being a real challenge too. And so, we've talked about the reality, and I'm glad we spent so much time talking about the data and the real problems that are public safety challenges in the district. But I want to get your thoughts about the perception challenge as well. How should New Yorkers think about their safety today, knowing that it's true that, by most measures, we're not as safe as we were, prior to the pandemic. Despite the improvements from 2021, let's say, in many areas, murders down, other improvements that have been sustained. So how should we think about kind of where we are now, having lived through the safest era in New York City's history, then come through an incredibly tumultuous 4 or 5 year 4-year stretch, and now in a new normal that feels a little uncertain to folks? How would you communicate the reality today to folks that are grappling with the perception, and what would your messaging be?
So the first is, I think, just to underscore the significance, and when I say this, I'm sort of talking to myself in the first instance. When I started this job, I think I'm a pretty good lawyer, a lot of training in that area and focus there without due attention to this issue, right, the communications. And so when I say that, if everyone else in the room knows, I'm just talking to myself then, but just the importance of talking about this and of talking about what we're doing. We have a great comm shop in the office now, and we're sort of being a lot noisier about what we're doing, and I'm supposed to urge everyone to sign up for our newsletter, right? I mean, it's a wealth of information. I joke, but I'm serious, right? Like, one way I was meeting with a group, we're talking about how to sort of get people here. It's like there's a great partnership to be had, right? Like, getting the information out about what is being done helps address both reality and perception. And the second thing, and I realize the audience for this is probably beyond Manhattan, folks trying to sort of kind of get to return here. Generally, I'm talking to Manhattanites, and I find that it's a great group to represent, because if you can have a real conversation like this one, you can talk in nuance. And so part of the issue is that the message is complex, right? Things are getting better, but not fast enough, right? That's not bad or good, right? And I think being comfortable talking in that complexity, treating everyone like a grown-up, and I feel, and I move around in Manhattan a lot, that if you can get beyond the one sentence, and so convenings like this are very important, and then bottling up the energy and then going out and talking, not just in the sort of tweet or the TikTok, but really the message, which is that, like, yes, a lot of things. I mean, shootings are down 50% since I took office. I'm really proud of that. That's really important, right? It's not the issue for here, right? Doesn't mean things are great here. It means we got to really focus on these felony assaults, and we got to focus on the shoplifting. But talking about them both and talking about them in some complexity, and at least for most audiences I'm in front of, you'll get some yelling, but you'll generally, if you treat people with the respect I think they're entitled to and get into the nuance, I think it's very helpful. And so that's what I try to do. I love coming to things like this because they allow for that sort of long format, which is becoming increasingly, rare in the public square. So I think it's important, and so my ask would be sign up for our newsletter, join us in that sort of complex discussion.
Thank you, District Attorney. I mean, we certainly couldn't agree more about the need for that kind of in-depth discussion, and you've been so generous with your time already today. Are there any other questions from the audience before we go?
Yeah, one there.
Yes, okay, we'll go to the row. Yeah, Celeste, right there. Maybe sixth row up. Somebody, yeah, I've got a microphone coming over.
Fast counter.
Oh, sorry, right here. Yeah, does anybody have a microphone? Right here, sorry, just because I already called on the fifth row. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Appreciate
Hi,
it.
I'm Celeste Fry with Public Works Partners. District Attorney, first, thank you for all that you've done in the last 2 years. My question is, you have a long history of working on issues of civil rights and social justice. How do we protect the civil rights of folks who are exhibiting, whether it's mental health challenges or, vendors or pedicabs who are doing illegal things in the streets or in and around Times Square? How do we protect their civil rights while also helping to make the streets feel safer for folks to come to shows?
Yeah, it will look certainly the first thing from our perspective, right? Everything that comes to us, thinking about the pedicab, is the Fourth Amendment, right? And we're vigilant there in our independent check on is the stop, is the search, bona fide. In the mental health space, which I've spent a lot of time thinking about, there's some, I think, fixes that have nothing to do, like just capacity, for example, right? Like, we just don't have enough beds, right? So even before you get to voluntary versus involuntary, we don't have enough capacity. And so that's something that is sort of neutral. I think everyone can get on board with that. And then in terms of the harder issues, I am seeing, particularly through our sort of specific hubs, just situations that the person who is experiencing them, and I don't mean to be paternalistic, it's inhumane, right? I mean, so it is, someone who is outside in this weather with no shirt on, talking to him or herself. Yes, my bailiwick only, comes into play if that person strikes someone or commits a crime. But to sort of ignore the sort of what precedes it, I think presents some issues of humanity. And I know reasonable minds can certainly disagree on that, but I think not only is it a public safety issue, and that's sort of obviously the four corners of my job, but how are we treating folks? And so having levers, we have the neighborhood navigators, which it's voluntary. They're touches. They're going out, they're buying someone a coffee, they're making connections. We started in February or March. We measure it every month, the number of touches, the number of sanitary kits handed out, the number of housing placements made, and there's real progress there, and that's great. But then there are some folks who like that you can't have that back and forth, and they're in such an acute place that they need a higher level of intervention. Where that line is, I think sort of reasonable people can disagree. As the kind of chief law enforcer, and I'm happy you raised my kind of civil rights enforcement background, someone who's trying to always think about the humanity of folks, I think where we have intervened along with sort of the mayor's folks or through the hub, it is people who, in addition to making other people fearful, are themselves in need of help.
Well, thank you, District Attorney, and thanks for the question. I think that is unfortunately all the time we have today. I'm so sorry for folks that had additional input, but thank you so much. I'm going to turn over to my colleague Jonathan for a moment, and again, thank you, District Attorney, for your time.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks again for being here today. Can we get another hand for Manhattan DA Bragg? Just really quickly, I also want to thank all of our panelists. That first panel was excellent. Also, Eli did a fantastic job with both of our panels. A big thank you to the Schubert organization for hosting us, for sponsoring today's event. Also, check out the Center for an Urban Future if you're interested in learning more. nycfuture.org. You can follow us on Twitter or Blue Sky or LinkedIn. Also, stay tuned. As I mentioned earlier, we are working on a big report about the economic importance of the arts, which Broadway is very much a big part of that. If you have ideas, if you want to share challenges or opportunities, come get in touch with us and keep posted for this report we'll be releasing in the next several months. But thanks again for being here and have a great day.